Klara Veshkova built a £1 million empire smuggling desperate migrants into the UK. But it was Ewan Pritchard's near-death discovery, Salma Noor's secret recordings, and Cassian Wiles' greed that finally brought her shadow network crashing down. What no one expected was her final confession she wasn't the one in charge. The real mastermind is still free. Klara Veshkova arrived in the UK with nothing more than a new identity and an elaborate plan. Originally from Varna, Bulgaria, she had spent her early 20s traveling across Europe, absorbing languages and observing how borders operated, not just physically, but financially. She saw loopholes everywhere. Overstretched customs officers, weak data, sharing between countries, and the unspoken truth that people could be bought. By the time she touched down at Heathrow under a false Hungarian passport, she already had an entire network prepared to move. Within months, she registered a company called Silverwind Global Logistics. To the world, it was a freight forwarding firm specializing in Eastern European goods: flat-screen televisions, car parts, heavy machinery. She rented a modest office space in Southwark and paid for sleek branding that gave the illusion of professionalism. But Silverwind wasn't built to ship electronics. It was a vehicle to move desperate human beings into Britain. Her logistics manager, Ruben Maz, operated entirely behind the scenes. A Dutchman with a past buried in Eastern Europe. Ruben had no fixed address and didn't appear in any official records. He communicated through layers of encrypted software, changing his digital footprints weekly. Ruben oversaw the transport lines. Trucks packed with hidden compartments made their way through Serbia, Hungary, and France before finally slipping into Kent. Klara ensured bribes were paid to corrupt customs officials who would turn a blind eye in Calais or Dunkirk. The migrants, mostly from Syria, Eritrea, and Pakistan, were told they were heading toward freedom. In truth, they were being sold into invisible chains. Klara's operation was never chaotic. It was cold and calculated. Each migrant paid between 4,000 to 1,000 zloty to reach the UK. Sometimes it was their own money. More often, it was borrowed from local crime syndicates back home. Money they'd have to repay through forced labor once they arrived. Klara didn't care how they got it. Her only interest was that the money flowed. Silverwind's books were kept spotless by a hired accountant in Krakow, who knew just enough to cook invoices, but not enough to understand what he was really hiding. Fake orders were generated. VAT filings were altered, and money moved through a maze of shell companies in places like Cyprus, Malta, and the Isle of Man. As the money came in, Klara invested in small businesses to clean it. Vape shops in Birmingham, nail salons in Leicester, and car washes in Glasgow, all fronts for dirty cash. She even sponsored a minor football team in Luton to boost her public image. Behind this curtain of normality, she controlled a trafficking network that rivaled entire cartels. But she never used threats or raised her voice. Klara was patient, poised, and devastatingly efficient. She believed her power came from invisibility. And for a while, she was right. Migrants who arrived were kept in squalid safehouses for the first few days. Their documents were taken, and they were told where to work, often in construction, agriculture, or cleaning. If they refused, threats followed. Not threats of violence, but of exposure and deportation. Fear kept them silent. Some tried to escape. A few succeeded. Most didn't. No one could find them after they vanished. Klara wasn't without enemies. Competing smuggling groups tried to undercut her routes. Police in Calais grew suspicious when a series of trucks were found empty, even though GPS showed stops consistent with human cargo. But Klara stayed ahead by rotating drivers, swapping out vehicles, and changing license plates mid-journey. The operation was a chessboard, and she never let emotion dictate her moves. Then one day, a burned-out van was discovered in an industrial estate in Luton. Inside were 3 forged passports, 6 phones stripped of SIM cards, and the charred body of a driver named Harun al-Bakir, a low-level courier in Klara's system. The death was ruled an accident at first, but investigators found a series of burner messages on one of the devices recovered. The messages referenced KG-1, a codename for a route linked to Silverwind. It was the first thread that would begin to unravel her empire. Klara didn't know it yet, but the shadows she worked so hard to stay hidden in had started to flicker with light. And someone was beginning to watch. Ewan Pritchard never considered himself brave. He was a numbers man. Content in his quiet office in Cardiff, surrounded by spreadsheets and the low hum of fluorescent lights. When a private equity firm hired him to audit a growing logistics company in London called Silverwind Global, he approached the task like any other, methodically, with no assumptions. The company's financials were impressive at first glance. Steady growth, clear contracts, and seemingly legitimate clients across Europe. But within the first week of reviewing the data, Ewan noticed patterns that made him pause. The company filed hundreds of invoices for the transport of electronics, yet there was no matching documentation of goods being received on the other end. He double-checked customs declarations. Many were missing. He found several payments routed through unfamiliar intermediaries in obscure locations like St. Kitts and Nevis or the Marshall Islands. He flagged them for a second look. When he cross-referenced the vehicles used in these shipments, he noticed the same license plate appearing with different reported drivers, across routes that were logistically impossible in the time frames logged. Curious, he ran a few of the plate numbers through public databases. One had been mentioned in a local Kent news article 6 months earlier, when Border Patrol discovered 20 people hidden in a refrigerated truck. The truck's owner was never traced. That was when Ewan felt the first twinge of fear. The kind that clings quietly, then builds. He began staying later at work, diving deeper into the financial maze Silverwind had created. What he found was not just fraud. It was evidence of an underground pipeline, one that trafficked in lives. The invoices were clever. Each was paired with fake tracking numbers, company stamps from partners that didn't exist, and payment receipts forged down to the cent. Ewan realized that most of the payments from clients were not from customers at all, but rather deposits made in cash and cleaned through converted cryptocurrency before being funneled into Silverwind's operational accounts. The operation was engineered to withstand scrutiny, but even the most intricate lies leave fingerprints. He compiled a dossier and prepared to send it to the Financial Crimes Division of the National Crime Agency. Before he could submit it, his home was broken into. Nothing of value was taken. No jewelry, no cash, not even the television. But his work laptop was gone. A backup USB drive stored in a false bottom drawer had been left untouched, perhaps missed in haste. Ewan didn't report the break-in. He told himself it could have been a random burglary. But 2 days later, while driving to a gym, his car exploded in the parking lot moments after he stepped out. The news framed it as a mechanical failure. He didn't correct them. The police asked routine questions, took a report, and moved on. But Iwan knew this was no accident. He fled to a safe house owned by a friend in North Wales, taking only his documents and backups. That same night, he used a public library computer to email a heavily encrypted message to a contact at Scotland Yard, attaching a selection of files. He never signed his name. The files triggered an immediate reaction. Scotland Yard activated an internal task force, Operation Hollow Veil. The agency had long suspected an active smuggling route through Eastern Europe, but until now, they had no proof. Iwan's files showed bank records, timestamps, and internal memos tying Silverwind to at least 30 known trafficking events. Most of the names were aliases, but patterns in the ledgers helped to identify secondary players. It was the first tangible evidence of a UK-based company directly profiting from organized human smuggling. Investigators worked quickly to cross-reference Iwan's data with Border Patrol records, immigration arrests, and social service reports. They found victims scattered across the country, some living under fake identities, others working without papers in agricultural fields and car washes. Their stories were consistent. They had paid large sums to be smuggled in, were promised safety, but ended up in debt and fear. Iwan's whereabouts were kept secret. He lived in silence, always moving. What haunted him wasn't just the danger he faced, but the knowledge of what he had uncovered. He hadn't just exposed a fraud. He had pulled back the curtain on a system of modern slavery, powered by greed and hidden behind the illusion of legitimate business. And somewhere, out of sight, the people he exposed were starting to hunt for the man who had betrayed them. Salma Noor had spent years on the other side of the law, working as a mid-level immigration officer at Heathrow. She processed paperwork, questioned asylum seekers, and helped determine who stayed and who was sent back. But over time, she grew disillusioned with the system. She saw the gaps, the corruption, the way desperation was treated like deceit. After resigning quietly, she drifted into NGO work until a quiet approach from the security service changed everything. MI5 needed someone like her, fluent in Somali, Arabic, and Turkish, with inside knowledge of immigration processes and a clean enough record to pass for someone looking to earn money outside the rules. Salma was given a new identity and trained for deep infiltration. Her mission was to penetrate a growing smuggling network tied to a mysterious logistics firm suspected of laundering millions while bringing in undocumented migrants. The group had links to Turkey, Bulgaria, and parts of the Balkans. A key figure in this network was a man named Beyhan Dervi, a Turkish national who coordinated the land-to-sea routes into the UK. He didn't deal with violence directly, but his word moved people across borders. Salma, now operating under the alias of Laila Ashar, introduced herself to Beyhan as a former customs agent turned rogue who could help make border runs smoother for a price. At first, she was kept at a distance, assigned to observe deliveries, stand guard during transfers, and collect basic payments from lower-tier operatives. She played the part well, never asking questions, never lingering too long in places she didn't belong. Eventually, Beyhan began to trust her. He brought her into meetings, let her handle logistics for small migrant groups, and allowed her access to storage units and safe houses. Salma began documenting everything. She wore a custom-made necklace that housed a tiny body cam. Every handshake, cash handoff, and shipment was recorded. She was stunned by the scale. Migrants were moved in compartments under truck floors, in crates marked as furniture, and in refrigerated vans. Some were teenagers who barely understood where they were going. Many had paid their life savings to reach Britain. The network promised them jobs and freedom, but the reality was darker. They were forced to work in car washes, food processing plants, or underground cleaning crews in hotels. Their wages docked for transport costs. If they tried to leave, they were threatened. Some disappeared entirely. Behan ran a tight operation, but he had enemies. Rival smuggling groups occasionally intercepted shipments or tried to poach his clients. This tension made him paranoid. He started suspecting leaks. He changed meeting spots, rotated phone numbers, and tested loyalty through traps. One day, Salma was instructed to escort a group of 7 migrants from a drop point near the M20 to a safe house in Birmingham. She did as told. But the van they were using had been tampered with. A tracker was hidden under the frame. Salma spotted it just before departure and disposed of it, but the suspicion stuck. A week later, Behan had her followed. His men trailed her to a public phone booth where she contacted her MI5 handler using a burner. Though she changed her route and circled around alleys to lose them, she knew it had been close. That night, her safe house was breached. The locks were untouched, but someone had been inside. Her notes were gone. Her hard drive had been taken. She vanished before they could find her again, pulled out by her handlers and relocated to a secure location under a new identity. But her sudden disappearance caused shockwaves. Behan grew erratic. He canceled shipments and interrogated his own men. He stopped trusting anyone. His operation began to collapse. Within days, several of his associates fled or went silent. Then, his body was discovered hanging in a storage unit near Croydon, surrounded by empty crates and forged IDs. No note was found. Authorities ruled it suicide, but some believed it was staged by those higher in the chain. Salma's footage was turned over to Scotland Yard and added to the growing evidence file in Operation Hollow Veil. Her recordings exposed dozens of drop points, cash stashes, and documented the faces of mid-level operatives across 3 cities. The smuggling network had taken a hit, but the woman truly behind it, Klara Veshkova, remained untouched. Her name never once spoken aloud in any meeting. She operated from the shadows, layers above even Behan. And despite the chaos, she had already begun replacing the pieces that had fallen. Cassian Weil had always known how to read the system. A property developer by trade and a chameleon by nature, he learned early that in the world of real estate, money moved quietly, hidden behind leases, shell companies, and renovation permits. In public, Cassian was a man of charm and class, often seen at charity galas or business conferences, speaking about urban regeneration and supporting migrant housing. But his properties told a very different story. Over the course of a single year, Cassian had purchased 27 homes across the Midlands, paying entirely in cash. None of them were luxury estates. They were run-down terrace houses and converted flats in neglected areas. Cheap, discreet, and perfect for what he really needed them for. Each house was used to warehouse migrants smuggled in through Klara Veshkova's network. After their arrival, they were moved into these homes, packed in groups of 12 to 15 per property. There were no beds, just mattresses on floors, and no official tenancy agreements. The windows were boarded, the heating rarely worked. And their mobility was controlled. They weren't allowed to speak to neighbors. Some of the houses were even rigged with security cameras, not for protection, but to monitor their movements. Cassian wasn't just renting these places to the smugglers. He was a full partner in the laundering pipeline. Klara's organization funneled dirty cash through his property deals. Money arrived in small transfers via fake buyers, individuals using stolen identities or forged documents, who then purchased the homes at inflated prices. Within weeks, Cassian would sell the property again, this time to another fake buyer, building a paper trail that made the money look legitimate. Through each transaction, he took his cut. To the outside world, it appeared that he was flipping homes for profit in struggling neighborhoods. No one questioned it, because housing was in short supply, and his developments were legal on paper. But inside one of those houses, something went wrong. A 15-year-old boy from Moldova named Pavel managed to escape through a bathroom window and fled into the night. Weak, hungry, and without a phone, he wandered into a public library at dawn and fell asleep behind a stack of books. A librarian found him and alerted authorities. At first, they assumed he was just another runaway. But Pavel handed them a plastic thumb drive he'd kept hidden in his shoe. It contained photos of the property, snapshots of IDs, and messages he had secretly recorded on a borrowed phone. Pavel had been documenting everything he could in the hope someone, somewhere, would believe him. The thumb drive reached Scotland Yard within 48 hours and was handed directly to the team running Operation Hollow Veil. What they saw horrified them. Faces of terrified migrants, a list of addresses, even footage showing cash being exchanged for names. But one thing stood out above all. Pavel had captured an image of Cassian Weil himself standing in a hallway, giving orders to a man holding a ledger. It was the first time anyone had tied Cassian directly to the safehouses. Until then, he had been untouchable. Authorities moved quickly, placing several properties under surveillance. Inside, they found migrants sleeping shoulder to shoulder, some without papers, others too frightened to speak. They found rosters listing work shifts at local car washes, with payments tracked in coded ledgers. None of the migrants had ever seen Klara. Some didn't even know who ran the network. But when asked about Cass, the name was repeated over and over. Cassian was arrested at a golf course in Surrey. He was halfway through a round, laughing with friends, when officers closed in. He didn't resist. During questioning, he denied everything. He claimed the houses were managed by subcontractors and that he was unaware of any illegal activity. But the evidence said otherwise. Emails, wire transfers, hidden cameras. Each item painted a picture of a man deeply embedded in the machinery of human exploitation. Despite overwhelming evidence, Cassian was released on bail, thanks to high-powered legal representation and strategic gaps in the chain of command. But for investigators, this was a major breakthrough. They had proof that the money wasn't just moving. It was being reinvested. The trafficking ring wasn't just about border crossings. It was about empire building using people as currency. And at the center of it all, untouched and unbothered, was Klara Veshkova, still in her penthouse, still operating in silence as her empire began to fray at the edges. In the heart of a fog-drenched December morning, armed officers from the National Crime Agency surrounded a sleek penthouse in Knightsbridge. The building stood tall and gleaming, blending in with the affluence of the area. But inside apartment 1C was the epicenter of one of the most elaborate human smuggling and money laundering operations the UK had ever seen. Klara Veshkova, the elusive mastermind, was inside. When the door was forced open, she didn't run or hide. She was calmly sipping wine, wearing silk loungewear, her television playing a Bulgarian soap opera. Her arrest was quiet, just like her reign had been. Simultaneously, across different corners of the UK and Europe, coordinated arrests unfolded. Cassian Weil was picked up again, this time without bail. His properties were seized, and documents recovered from a hidden safe revealed transactions between his companies and a dozen offshore accounts, all linked back to Silverwind. Ruben Maz, the Phantom Operations Manager who had never left a footprint, had vanished weeks earlier. Surveillance traced him as far as a casino in Istanbul before he disappeared completely. Authorities suspected he had either changed his identity or been silenced. Either way, he was gone. News of Klara's arrest erupted across the UK media. It was the first time her name had surfaced publicly. Reporters called her the Queen of Shadows, a woman who had turned human desperation into a multi-million-pound empire. As investigators combed through her properties, bank accounts, and encrypted devices, they began to understand the full reach of her network. More than $42 million had flowed through Silverwind's accounts in just over 3 years. Nearly 3,000 migrants had been trafficked using her routes, many of them still unaccounted for. In a sealed courtroom session, prosecutors presented the staggering evidence. Salma Noor's footage played a central role, showing cash deals, false documents, and hidden compartments inside trucks. Ewan Pritchard's financial records traced the path of the laundered money with chilling precision. Dozens of witnesses were quietly brought in, including former drivers, brokers, and migrants who had escaped. Their testimonies revealed how widespread the network was. It wasn't just a smuggling operation. It was a business empire with layers of deception and control. But just when authorities thought they had unraveled it all, a revelation shook the case. Forensic accountants uncovered an offshore trust registered in the Seychelles in the name of Ivanka Veshkova, Klara's estranged sister. The trust held more than $18 million in cryptocurrency and foreign investments. When questioned, Klara showed a rare crack in her composure. In a closed-door statement, she revealed that the money wasn't hers. It was being held for someone she referred to only as the Mirror Man. She claimed she wasn't the architect of the network, merely its manager. The true leader, according to her, remained unnamed and untouched. This admission shifted the narrative. Was Klara really the top of the ladder, or just the most visible piece? Investigators scrambled to connect the dots, revisiting old files and new leads. But the Mirror Man left no trace. No digital fingerprints, no known alias. It was as if he was just a myth, a shadow controlling everything from beyond reach. Klara was sentenced to 2 years in a high-security women's prison. She never appealed. She refused to testify against her remaining partners, During incarceration, she maintained the same poise she had at her arrest. Calm, unreadable, and utterly silent about the full truth. Meanwhile, Cassian Weil received a 20-year sentence for human trafficking and financial fraud. His real estate holdings were auctioned off, and the proceeds used to establish rehabilitation programs for trafficking survivors. Operation Hollow Veil officially concluded a year later. Hundreds of raids were carried out, dozens arrested, and countless migrants rescued. But even with Klara behind bars, the feeling lingered that the operation had been much bigger than anyone realized. In cities across Europe, smaller smuggling rings continued to operate. Less organized, more dangerous, and harder to track. The headlines moved on. New scandals emerged. But the scars remained. In the frightened eyes of survivors, in the empty homes that once served as prisons, and in the lingering question no one could answer. Who was the mirror man? As Klara sat in her prison cell, watching the same soap opera on a small screen, she smiled faintly. She had lost her empire, but she still held a secret no one else had cracked. And somewhere, in another high, rise or quiet village, the real mastermind still pulled strings, untouched and invisible. The business of moving people had merely shifted hands. The system remained.